everyone, my name is Katja and I'm Cat Coloring. A warm welcome to my channel for both new and old subscribers. Today's video is a translated flip through of this coloring book Beyond the World Fairy Tales by Eriy. This is the second in her new series consisting of 4 coloring books. The first one, World Heritage Traveling Through Time and Places, is already up on my channel, and the following 2 after this one, The Legends and the World Literature, will be coming soon on my channel, all translated from Japanese to English. But before we begin today, we need to know something about fairy tales, because fairy tales is this genre that this book is all about. So, fairy tales are a very, very old genre in the literature. It is actually what we call an oral and not a written genre originally, because these fairy tales were told from one person to another throughout decades and even centuries and millennia. This means that we have a lot of different variants of the same fairy tales. And some fairy tales also look a lot alike, but they are different fairy tales. The oldest written fairy tale is actually Cinderella. It was written down in the year 851 AD in China. And we just pause here. China. I think that a lot of people think, oh, China, an Asian Cinderella. Yes, because these fairy tales are the same whether you are in Europe or Africa or Asia or America. A lot of the fairy tales exist in these different variants, but the core in many of the fairy tales is actually the same. Another example is Snow White. Snow White is known in 50 to 60 variants just in Europe alone. So this is a good example of these fairy tales existing in many different variants throughout time and place. And that is why, and I say this because it will make more sense when we dive into the fairy tales in this book, that some of the drawings here made by Eriy actually makes more sense, because she draws some of the fairy tales from the variants of the fairy tales that she is used to, and perhaps not that we are used to, at least in the western part of the world. A lot of us also think about the fairy tales in the Disney movie versions of them. But in the real fairy tale, for example, with Snow White, the evil queen did not fall down a mountain and was killed like in the movie by Disney. She was actually killed because she was invited to the wedding, and there she got out some very hot iron shoes and had to dance until she died. Actually, a lot of the old fairy tales have very dramatic endings where the bad guys really get an evil and cruel death. But it has all been removed in the Disney versions of these fairy tales. Well, enough about that. Let's dive into this book and look what fairy tales we have here. Okay, so we open the book, and then these are the introductory pages here. The beginning of the story. And you can see we have Manon here, and as I said in the last video, Manon from the Romantic Garden books, the little flower girl from the land of Cocotte. She is the main character in this book, together with Hershey, her friend, who is a migratory bird. So it says, the beginning of the story. At Manon's and the migratory bird, Hershey's, there is a little library. This sunny day, a sparkling and pleasant light shines through the window with the old colored glass. This is a special place for us. So we are at home at Manon's house, and we have this window here with colored glass. The light shines in, and we are here in her library. And here you can see all of these books containing, amongst other things, fairy tales. The bookshelves are filled with books telling stories from all over the world, like Cinderella, Arabian Nights, The Wizard of Oz, and Princess Kaguya. When you find your favorite book, unfold your imagination. Let's go on an adventure to the world of fairy tales. And then, like in the other book, we have these pages, 4 pages here with the content of the book. We can see here it's divided according to which authors who have either written the fairy tales, like Hans Christian Andersen here, the Danish fairy tale writer, or the ones who in the late 1700s or the beginning of the 19th century, like the brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault, they gathered all of these fairy tales and wrote them down in books, and then they were published so that all people could know these fairy tales. We also have some from Arabian Nights, British fairy tales, Russian fairy tales, and of course the Japanese fairy tales, which end this book. So let's dive right into it. And this is the fairy tales written down by the French author Charles Perrault. He did it so in the 1790s. He did so. And the first is, of course, very familiar to all of us. It's Cinderella. And we must imagine that Manon reads these fairy tales, and then she is sort of transformed into the main character here in these fairy tales, because we can see Hershey, the migratory bird, here, and we can see Manon here as Cinderella. So the first page here with Cinderella, it says, Cinderella was always forced to do house chores by her stepmother and bad sisters. That even though she wears ragged clothes, she was a beautiful girl at heart. So actually her clothes look really, really nice. So when you color it, you perhaps should add some holes and stuff to her clothes so that it looks like rags. Or color it in some dull colors, gray colors, for example. The second page here, when the friendly wizard used his wand, Cinderella's clothes were immediately transformed into the most beautiful dress she'd ever seen. And here we have a very good example of a difference between the version that Eriy has heard and the version that we have heard. In the European versions, it's her dead mother's spirit, symbolized by a bird, who gives her these dresses when she goes to these different balls at the castle. In the Disney version, she has got a fairy godmother, but in the version that Eriy has read, it's a wizard who gives her these dresses. This is a good example of the different variants of fairy tales we have. Then we have this, and I had a bit of difficulty finding the title of this because there is made a movie about this, and the American title is Puss in Boots. And you can see here it is a cat with the boots. But the original fairy tale is actually called The Poor Miller's Son. And he sits there. And the text says, the owner of the mill, this water mill here, dies, and only one cat is left. The cat asked the confused young man, here he must be the miller's son, to make him a pair of boots. And from there on, the cat sort of runs the show. And here we can see that thanks to the cat, the young man became king, and the cat first minister. The portrait also depicts a cat which confidently wears his boots here. Or actually it says Wellingtons, but I think that boots are perhaps more appropriate to translate it to. And that was the fairy tales by Charles Perrault, or gathered by Charles Perrault. Now we get to quite a few fairy tales gathered and written down by the brothers Grimm in Germany. And this one is perhaps not known for all because it has not been made into a movie by Disney, but it's called The 12 Dancing Princesses. I've actually used this text in my teaching with students where we have read it and analyzed this fairy tale. This painting depicts the 12 beautiful princesses who live in a castle. Will anyone be able to reveal the secret these girls have? Where do they dance all night long until their shoes are worn down? And there's a very interesting story behind this fairy tale, so read it if you haven't read it. It's actually quite good. And you can find the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales online, actually. Just look for them. I can't remember if it's called thebrothersgrimm.com, and then you can read it in different languages. And all of the fairy tales are there. I use it actually in my classes. So here we have, and this is also one which is quite easy to guess, we have Sleeping Beauty. Because of the curse of a witch, the princess fell in a deep sleep on her 15th birthday, together with all the people and animals on the castle. Soon the castle was covered with a big thicket of thorn bushes, so it disappeared completely. And here we have another example of the differences between versions of the fairy tale, because in most European versions of the fairy tale, it's an evil fairy or an old fairy which is not invited to her baptism, who gets angry and then instead of giving her present, says that when she turns 15 or 16, different versions of the fairy tale, she will fall asleep and cut herself on, I can't remember what it's called in English, but she will cut herself and then she will die. And then the last of the good fairies changes this and says, no, she will fall asleep for 100 years. So the curse, or what you may call it, is altered from death to 100 years. And you can see here the thorn bushes and everything, and the castle and the sleeping animals. But a witch in the fairy tale that Eriy has grown up with. So on this page, Sleeping Beauty is dreaming of the prince that will come, and they will dance together in a garden filled with blooming flowers. So this is not when she's woken up, it's in her dreams that she dreams about the prince. Okay. So this double page is, of course, Snow White. And I must say that these dwarfs certainly differ from the dwarfs depicted in the Disney film Snow White, which I have seen a couple of times, actually. When it came out, my mother was a little girl and she was in the movie and saw it, and she told me later that it scared her almost to death. She thought that the evil queen, when she was transformed into the old witch, was so scary she couldn't sleep for many days later. So I have to say that Disney really, really made an incredible movie out of Snow White. But these dwarfs are like almost little children here in Eriy's version. But anyway, it says, the little house where Snow White sought refuge belonged to 7 dwarfs. And Snow White quickly becomes popular, and it seems that they have decided to give her a welcome party. So this depicts the welcome party for Snow White. But we are not finished with Snow White, because we have the evil queen here. The queen asks the magical mirror, who is the fairest of them all? And one day the mirror answered, Snow White is the fairest, and not the queen. And you can see all of her potions and everything. So all of this, of course, indicates that she is some sort of a witch. And you can also see the apples waiting here. And on this page, we find another fairy tale, Rapunzel. Rapunzel, with the long, beautiful hair, was held captive in the tall tower by a witch. The only way up was to use her long hair. And we all know this from the Disney movie Tangled, which is sort of different. The original fairy tale, the mother and father couldn't get a child, and then they lived next to a witch, and she had a garden filled with a certain type of flower. And suddenly the woman in the house craved these flowers, and the man went in several times and stole the flowers from the witch. And one day he was caught by the witch, and he said, please, please, please don't transform me into a frog. Please, I'm only doing this because my wife really wants to eat these flowers. And then the witch says, okay, you may pick all of the flowers you want in my garden, but the child that your wife is bearing, I must have her when she is born. So the parents give up their child because of the mother's craving for these flowers that are in the witch's garden. So it's completely different from the Disney version. I don't know which version Disney has used, but it's certainly not the one from the original fairy tale. But this double page shows us Rapunzel, lives at the top of a tower, and her little bird friends visits her. It looks like they have brought a lot of flowers with them today. Hershey here, he has this bow, so this this bird is Hershey, and of course it's Manon as Rapunzel. And also a very, very well-known fairy tale from the brothers Grimm, Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood and her mother are baking cookies to an old woman living in the woods. And in some versions, it's just an old woman, and in other, it's Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother. When it's finished, let's go and give it to her, together with a bottle of wine. And now we are in the grandmother's house. When I stepped into grandma's house, things were different. It's awful. A wolf disguised as an old woman lies in the bed. So now we are suddenly right in the story, and we are Red Riding Hood. And this fairy tale was actually quite difficult for me to find the original one, because the Japanese title is Yuki, Shiro, and Barabe, and those are Japanese names and not the names of the actual sisters that are in this fairy tale. But I did some research and found out that this fairy tale is the fairy tale of the two sisters Snow White, not the Snow White with the dwarfs, but Snow White and Rose Red, which is another fairy tale about these two sisters. So it says Snow White and Rose Red, Yukishiro and Barabe, are very close sisters. We are always together, no matter what we do. All the animals of the forest also love them. They are wearing matching ribbons to show that they are friends. So these ribbons here must be colored in the same color. And here, a winter's day, a bear comes to the house. First, they were scared and hid behind their mother, but soon they both fell in love with this unusual guest. And I think I remember that the bear is some sort of enchanted prince or something like that. And then we have one of the most well-known fairy tales of them all, Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel walked through the woods when they saw a house made of cakes and sweets. They ate from it without knowing that it was a witch's house. And here, the treasure belonging to the witch. Thanks to Gretel's wits, they conquered the witch and found the treasure she kept hidden within. The pearls and diamond rings, also beautiful as I have never seen before. So here you can go completely crazy with coloring all of these jewels. And a lesser-known fairy tale, The Pixies and the Cobbler. The poor cobbler slept, and while he slept, the pixies made a pair of beautiful shoes or boots with embroidery and beautifully adorned. So the cobbler is poor, and these pixies come every night to help him make beautiful boots and shoes that he can sell. And during the days and weeks, he becomes more and more wealthy because of the help of the pixies. And here we see the pixies. The cobbler became rich thanks to the work of the pixies, and he decided to give them a gift, clothing, because they wore only rags. The pixies were so happy that they ran outside and danced. And after this, they actually leave him and don't work for him anymore, but he doesn't need their help anymore because he has got a lot of wealth and can make do with that for the rest of his life. And here, this was actually one of my very, very favorite fairy tales when I was a child. The 7 Kids. And it's these goat kids, you know. The 7 kids hid quickly when the wolf came, so we couldn't find them, and the youngest hid in a big clock. I simply loved this fairy tale, and I was so scared when the wolf came, I remember. And here, the kids love to get their mother to read them stories before they go to bed. I really like stories about conquering scary wolves. Don't we all? So we have reached the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales in this book. And we begin with Thumbelina. And here it says, it was a little butterfly that saved Thumbelina from being married to the toad. The ribbons are tied to the water lily, or the leaf here of the water lily, and she floats down the river. And on the next page, Thumbelina nursed an injured swallow, which couldn't fly south for the winter. They've become good friends. Oh, and this was when she lived with a mouse, where she sought refuge. And now for a very well-known fairy tale, The Snow Queen. The Snow Queen, wearing a beautiful dress which glitters like a snowflake, brings the cold winter with her. So I think that you would have to use a lot of glitter on this page on her dress, like stickles and something like that, to make it really shiny and sparkly. And here, the little girl, Gerda goes alone to the queen's castle to save Kai, who is trapped by the Snow Queen. Will little Gerda be able to overcome the Snow Queen? And the next one, also a very well-known fairy tale, The Little Mermaid. The night of her 15th birthday, the Little Mermaid was allowed to get to the surface of the ocean for the first time, and she was completely fascinated by the landscape, which was so different from the one below the sea. You can see here she sits here on this cliff watching the ships and the castle here on land. And now we are down way below the water, and you can clearly see where we are. The sea witch lived at the bottom of the deep sea. In the cellar in her cave is a laboratory with potions which can make your dreams come true. If you have a wish, you might visit her. And we all know it comes with a cost to get your wishes fulfilled by the sea witch. So now the little match girl. New Year's Eve, the little match girl, shaking with cold, lit up the matches she was supposed to sell. One out of the flames came a wonderful magical sight. And that's the goose and the Christmas tree. And at the end, her grandmother appears and take her with her to God because she dies. A very, very sad fairy tale, I have to say. And now we shift places. We go to the Arabian Nights fairy tales. And this is actually the storyteller in Arabian Nights, Scheherazade. The stories Scheherazade tells are all fascinating and interesting. Even the cruel king opened his heart bit for bit for the stories she told. And that is where she told the stories and never ended them, because this king had a cruel habit of beheading, I think, his wives the night after the wedding. So she began telling his stories, and then she ended a story in the beginning of a night and began a new one. And that way she prolonged her life and got a lot of children with the king, and in the end he chose not to kill her. I think it was something like that. So here we have Ali Baba, one of the really well-known stories from Arabian Nights, Ali Baba and the 40 Robbers. Inside the rock doors, which are opened by a magical word, wonderful treasures gathered by the robbers are everywhere. And I think the magical word, wasn't it the sesame open up, or something like that, sesame open. And here we have a Morgiana. To protect Ali Baba against the robbers, Morgiana gets close to the robbers disguised as a dancer, and she holds a dagger in her hand. Will she be able to protect Ali Baba? Interesting. And of course, Aladdin. Aladdin and the Magical Lamp. To steal Aladdin's magical lamp, a magician disguised as a lamp seller visits the innocent princess and offers her a new lamp for the old one. And here are some very beautiful lamps you can color. And now we switch again to a man called Carlo Collodi, and it's Pinocchio. Mr. Geppetto, a carpenter, didn't have any children, so he made a wooden doll and called it Pinocchio. In his workshop, there's also toys made of wood for Pinocchio. That was just the one page. And now it's for a fairy tale that I have never heard of. I don't know it, but it's by Maurice Maeterlinck and it's called Bluebird. So perhaps some of you know it. Two children, Chiru Chiru and Michine, go through the forest looking for the bluebird. So that was a Japanese version of it, because it's Japanese names. It says so in the text. Suddenly a big tree blocked the way. That must be that tree, and it really looks angry, and it looks quite scary actually. And here, which bird cage is the bluebird's favorite? The one with ribbons or the one filled with flowers? Is it the bird sky blue, or is it aqua blue with a touch of green? So you can imagine how you want to color this bird, completely blue or blue with a touch of green. And Lewis Carroll from Alice in Wonderland, these two pages. So here we have the closet of the Queen of Hearts, and it's filled with very cute heart patterned dresses, all of them of course designed by the Queen. So that's her wardrobe. And here we have Alice, who ends up participating in a strange tea party. And the teacups are on the table, we can see here. And then these pages, Frances Hodgson Burnett. Again, I think it's a fairy tale I don't know anything about. It's called Secret Garden. When Mary opened the door with the key, she found a beautiful flower garden appeared before her. So this is this secret garden, apparently. And here, inside the garden here, flowers bloom in the flower garden, drawn by Mary. Climbing roses, crocus, lilies and poppies, all are colorful and smell sweet. So here we have the British fairy tales, and this fairy tale is quite well known, I think, in the English-speaking world. It's Jack and the Beanstalk. It's actually not quite as known here in the Scandinavia. It's not one of the fairy tales I heard when I grew up. But this is Jack, and it has something to do with him planting some sort of a bean, and up grows a beanstalk, and he climbs it, and then he comes to this kingdom or realm in the sky, here in this, up on the clouds. This castle lies there, and a giant lives there. And this giant has a hen which lay golden eggs. So it says that Jack decides to steal the hen which lays the golden eggs from the giant's castle. Be careful not to be seen. And here on the opposite side, we can see the golden eggs that this hen has laid. And it says that these eggs also have a wonderful pattern on the shell. Let's imagine what kinds of chickens will hatch from these eggs. And here so we have both the eggs and the chickens. And here is my eldest daughter's favorite fairy tale of them all, The Three Little Pigs. She absolutely loved this fairy tale, and I had to read it out loud for her so many times when she was little. I have lost count of it. Every day, several times. She loved it. And we all know it. The three little pigs, they are moving away from their mother, and they each build their house. And the first built its house with straw, and the second with wood, and the third was the smartest of them because it built its house out of bricks. And in some versions of the fairy tale, the wolf actually eats the first and the second pig, but not the third. And in other versions of the fairy tale, and this was the version that I read up to my daughter, they all survive because they all go and hide here with the third and wisest of the pigs, who has built his house out of bricks. And now it's Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels. Okay, so Gulliver's ship sinks, and he is washed up to a land populated by very small people. The girl I became friends with showed me around in the town. So this is Gulliver, and here's the girl who shows him around in this land in the town here. I'm not that familiar also with Gulliver's Travels. But this one is from Sweden. It's Selma Lagerlöf, and it's from Nils Holgersson's Mysterious Journey. Nils was a boy who was actually very, very naughty and teased everything and everyone. So a pixie transformed him into a little person, and then to teach him a lesson. And then he flew on the back of this goose and experienced a lot of strange things and amazing things in different places in Sweden. It was actually a book she made for the teaching of geography, amongst other things, in the Swedish schools. And she was also a school teacher, actually, Selma Lagerlöf, before she became a writer. And then he is, of course, changes his behavior and becomes a very nice boy here. But this depicts him flying on this goose. And Tomte, it actually says in the text a fairy, but Tomte is not a fairy, it's a pixie. And pixies are some creatures that are present in many of the Scandinavian fairy tales from old times, because pixies are you can say mythical beings that have appeared in both Norway and Sweden and Denmark, and some of them lived in the woods and some of them on the farms in the countries. So we have a lot of stories about pixies. But Tomte is a pixie who lives in an old house. So this is Tomte, the pixie's house here. It's said that if you are kind, Tomte will be good for all in your household. And that was the thing about these pixies living in the houses. So if you behaved well, the pixie would make sure that the animals were thriving and the farm was good and you would have a good harvest and so on. But if you were evil or cruel or forgot the pixie and so on, then he would punish you by giving you a bad harvest and not taking care of the animals and so on. So pixies were certainly not to be trifled with in the old days. And this is something that Americans will recognize instantly, because this is Lyman Frank Baum's The Wizard of Oz. And here we have Dorothy together with the others. And to fulfill Dorothy's wish to return home, Dorothy and her friends leave the Emerald City. So this must be colored in emerald colors, I imagine, and travel south. A new journey begins. And here on this page, we can see the four witches. There were 4 witches in Oz. The witches in the north and south were very kind women, but the witches of the east and the west here were terrifying and evil. Okay, I don't know the Wizard of Oz that well, but I think I have seen the movie once when I was a child. So this is from the Russian fairy tales, and this was actually a fairy tale I heard a lot when I was growing up. I didn't know it was from Russia, but now I certainly do. It's called The Big Turnip. And it is all about this man, this farmer, who grows turnips. And the turnip that the old man planted, one of them became so big that he couldn't himself pull it out of the ground. And everybody had to come and help him, the wife and the daughter and the animals. And finally they get it up from the ground. And everybody works together to pull up this turnip, and then they eat the turnip. And it looks like Grandpa's turnip pie is also on the table. And now we have reached the end of the book and the Japanese fairy tales. So this is called Kaguya Hime, and it's about a princess called Kaguya, and she always gave to the nobles who wanted to marry her some very extremely difficult tasks, that they had to collect some things for her, otherwise she wouldn't consider marrying them. So it could be the shell of a swallow, the skin of a fire mouse, a stone bowl for a Buddha, a branch of a horai jade, and a dragon's neck jade. So some really, really difficult tasks. Probably because she didn't want to marry them, I don't know. And here we have Princess Kaguya. She cried when she saw the moon, because she will be fetched at a full moon night and has to return to the moon. I don't know this fairy tale, but it seems like she's belongs to the moon, or she has to leave Earth somehow. And here we have Urashima Taro. Urashima Taro saved the turtle and was taken to Ruguyu Castle. Here, that's a turtle. And when I rode on the back of a turtle and sailed through the seas, a beautiful castle appeared before me. So here we can see the castle. And here on this page, a beautiful princess named Otohime lives in this Ruguyu Castle. Let's take a look around the castle with the princess as a guide. And that's it. So it must be some underwater sea world here. And this is the beginning of the animal zodiac. The animals decided to have a race, and the animal who got to be number 12 or the 12th place or something would be the king of the animals for a year. So this is an explanation of this zodiac, which they have in Asia, you know, where you can be born in the sign of the dragon or the hare or the tiger or the dog and so on. And these two pages are some sort of a mix-up of all of these fairy tales that we have heard from the world of fairy tales. This is a coloring book with illustrations gathering motifs from the many fairy tales of this book. Use your favorite colors and techniques. And that was it. That was this book. And here we reach the end of the story. Explore the land of the little people with Gulliver. Look for the blue bird. Take a break at Alice's tea party. Imagine how the sea looks like from the window on Ruguyu Castle, or the taste of a house made of sweets. Every time I open a book, a wonderful adventure begins. Manon was absorbed in her book until the sun set and the stars were shining in the sky. Then she fell asleep. I'm certain that you will travel through the world of fairy tales even in your dreams. And that was it. And then we have these sort of bookmarks you can color and cut out and use here. That was the end of our journey with this coloring book. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it gave you a better understanding of the drawings in this book and what fairy tales they come from. So I hope that you will like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I also hope to see you in the next video with the World Legends book by Eriy. So have a very nice day. Take care of yourself until I see you in the next video. Happy coloring. Bye.